Hello, and welcome to the latest episode of Leagues Ahead, the AGL's vodcast where we discuss the Arena Gauntlet League's next offering. And in this case, my special guest is Adam S. He's the lead designer of our so-called Next Generation tournament. I'm Christopher York. I'm your host, and I'm a philosopher of sport and games, the founder of the Arena Gauntlet League, and current tournament organizer. Today we're going to discuss the what, where, when, why, and how of Next Generation. Adam, this was your baby. Tell us about it.
Well, yeah, this is kind of an out-of-nowhere league. It wasn't really on the schedule. We didn't have it planned. But we'd been talking about doing a league where we kind of split the player base into people who had a track record of winning a number of events or coming in a lot of top eights, and people who hadn't had that opportunity yet. And that had been something we've been tossing around, tried to get some traction for Ether Drift, maybe have the theme be like the Grand Prix and then the regular race circuit. But in the end, there was too much going on in Ether Drift. That one really kind of went a different direction. But I didn't want to let go of the idea of sort of an opportunity for people who hadn't won a league yet, who hadn't top eighted more than once or twice, to get a shot at winning the whole thing without the usual suspects sort of hogging all the spotlight. So this was kind of just a shower thought to me at some point. I was like, well, instead of doing a split league, let's just have a league just for the people who haven't had that opportunity yet. And we had a 2-week window between Ether Drift and the return to Tarkir, which isn't enough. So we also had to innovate on that front a little bit. I was like, let's do it. Let's cram it in. There were a lot of sort of logistical questions and issues with that, but so far it looks like it's going to work out pretty good.
Yeah, so I think that let's talk a little bit about the concept of a tiered league and what were some of the obstacles that we faced in running a tiered league. As I recall, and this is just to jog your memory really, one of the obstacles or objections to a tiered league was that it would split the player base, right? And it would make it such that we're basically running two tournaments at once, where some people would feel aggrieved that they couldn't play in the other half of the tournament. So the spikes, the advantage ones, might feel badly that they can't feed on the lower ranked, and the lower ranked might also feel like they're being treated with kids' gloves and they can't play against the higher ranked players and therefore can't learn important gameplay lessons or become better players or go through whatever process of improvement that they would desire to. So it seemed like from the beginning the idea of a tiered league was going to be difficult to run. Any thoughts on that? So it seems like we kind of solved the problem here by eliminating the top half of the tournament. The normal strong competitors just aren't allowed to play in this tournament for the first time ever. So this again is novel design space. Does it actually solve the objections to the tiered league that we had in the past?
Well, so my experience, I did a lot of talking through league crafting, debating with people how we could pull off a league where we separate out people to some degree, right? And I found there was a lot of support for that idea. Like, I do think even amongst the people who would be on the the highly successful end of the spectrum, right? Those players, the Dragons, were supportive of the idea of a league, but I think a lot of people had a lot of different visions of how it could or should look to do that. So, like, my vision of it was always that you would be able to play your matches against anyone, whether or not they were a Dragon or a regular leaguer, but that there would be split standing. So there would be essentially two separate leagues going on at once, but it wouldn't mess up our matchmaking or divide players on a matchmaking level. Some people hate that. Some people really thought, no, if you're going to do this, you have to separate out the players with more experience from the other players, and have them play each other separately, not cross paths. I didn't think that was essential, but for some people, they thought that was really what like the rewarding aspect would be to have, especially if you're on the more successful end of the spectrum, to be just playing matches against other people in a pool of players with more experience, track records of success. That would be sort of its own cool space, which I agree with, but I agree the problems that you laid out with that, I think they weren't insurmountable, but they were significant. That it cut into your ability to matchmake. If you're a European player who goes into the smaller pool of historically successful players, then maybe it's a lot harder to matchmake. And you do just lose out on the sort of dynamic pairing up with people from all over the league. It would just feel like two separate things happening at the same time.
Yeah.
So yeah, those were the obstacles. Those really made it too difficult for Aetherdrift, although Aetherdrift just also developed in its own direction that wasn't really focused on this. So yeah, I think by separating out the leagues entirely, I mean, part of what made separating them out entirely the way we've done it for Next Generation, and just having a league exclusively for the players who haven't top eighted more than 2 times. Part of what makes that work here is that we actually had such a short window, which is a big disadvantage logistically in a lot of ways. Kind of was an advantage in that the players who are missing out, who aren't included in this league, really only have a short period where they're down between leagues. And it's really kind of a bonus league. If we weren't doing this, we probably wouldn't be doing anything at all.
Right.
So you're not really missing out.
Yeah, and eventually you found a role for the top performing players anyway, which brings us to a discussion of the so-called dragon mechanic. Can you talk us through the dragon mechanic and what experienced players have to look forward to in this tournament? Why they're waiting their 3 weeks to buffer for Tarkir Dragonstorm League to kick off?
Yeah, well, we did want to give them a way to participate, and also just it's a resource that we have available to us that we were excited to find something to do with, right? Like something for all of these experienced great players. And the thing that, after we tossed it around a few ideas, that really I think stuck was the idea of it being sort of like a boss battle. You play one match against a top tier player with your own pool. So that sort of mirror match element came into it as well, where they're going to be taking your pool and having to speed build their own deck from it. You'll have, possibly depending on when you choose to play that match, because you can play it at any point during the league, you'll have a little more experience with your pool, with your cards, a little bit longer to deck build it. But the other player, has maybe more experience in the league, more experience going to top eights. So should be an interesting dynamic. It'll be interesting to see how the Dragons do. It'll be a big challenge, I think. But also, it'll be a challenge on the Dragon side. If you're not winning your Dragon matches, I feel like that'll be a point of pride. It's going to be a tough pill to swallow if you're not winning those.
Yeah. And just to be clear, the Dragons are competing for what is essentially a side pot, right? Out of donated and side event raised store credit.
Yes, yeah. So there'll be something in it. There were some worries. I'm never too worried about this, but some worries that if there weren't enough incentives, then the Dragons might just not be invested enough for this.
Or they could be in the king making, right? So that's the thing. Like incentives kind of, they help reduce king making problems in game design, I think. And I think we kind of ended up in a pretty good spot where the prize isn't such a great bounty that it's going to be unbalancing, but there's still something to fight for. There's a reason for experienced players to also be excited about this tournament and take part in a pretty risk-free way, and also contribute their expertise to guiding novice players. So because this is essentially a duplicate sealed match, every dragon match is a sort of deck clinic for the new players, and seeing how more experienced players would play with their pools if they had the chance. So hopefully this leads to a lot of like learning moments, and it might actually help them with the rest of their tournament. So there could be some impetus to play the dragon matches early so that you know what the best build of your deck is. Some people are saying they're going to play them last because they're going to be the hardest. There's actually already a good amount of engagement and discussion at this point, which to me indicates that we've come up with a fairly good mechanic. When there's a good difference of opinion on the server as to what the correct strategy is or what people are going to do, that's always my clue that the league committee has hit the nail on the head in terms of the right amount of the right mechanic at the right time for the right reason.
Yeah. Well, like, I'd never even really thought about this as like a strategic. I'm very interested in exactly what you're saying, designing mechanics where the strategic correct decision isn't obvious, even at the end of the league. Like when we get there, we're like, well, we don't even know what was the right strategy, right? Like people were recently talking about Duskborn. What was the thing to do? Do you get a huge deck with better quality cards? Do you go for a smaller deck with the less powerful packs? And like I love that, so I'm really into that. But I wasn't even really thinking about dragon matches as being sort of like a strategic element, more just a cool challenge. But it's interesting to me that it's not actually obvious to people when to fit it into your league. Do you leave it? Do you race it out of the gates? I think that's a cool. It'll be interesting to see where people land on that. That's a fun little side piece from this. And as you're saying, there's a couple other things that have come out of this, sort of that I didn't even really anticipate, like the idea that this would be a deck clinic for people is fun, I think.
So that's I think these are all good things about it. And I think like the best league mechanics are those that remain unsolved even after we have a few weeks of playing with them, right? So like you're talking about Duskborn's dread mechanic and whether a small deck with less powerful cards or a bigger deck with more powerful cards is the right answer. I don't think we actually conclusively decided what the verdict was on that after the fact even. So similarly, we might not come up with an answer to the question of when is it right to play your dragon match in next generation tournament. Interestingly enough, this seems to be a 3-week tournament where a lot of ideas that couldn't have had their day anywhere else ended up. I want to point out that I think it was Johnny, when he used to be on the league committee, for the longest time he was kind of spitballing about a duplicate sealed tournament. And I think like a duplicate sealed tournament might be a bit too samey for everybody all the time, but having duplicate sealed matches individually that are different each time in the form of the dragon matches seems to be a way that finally solved that puzzle and got the duplicate sealed mechanic into a league. Just observing that.
We snuck it in.
More of an observation than anything else.
And it wasn't like we were trying to shoehorn in duplicate sealed here. This was like, I think it just was interesting because it fit this dynamic, right? Of, okay, you're going to do the boss battle. And there was this sort of question of, well, what deck do the bosses get? It's like, let's just give them your pool and see how they build it, right? Like, that fit really organically, kind of not at all something that we were trying to force. Even though, yes, as you say, that's been something that we've kind of discussed on and off in the past. And I think it's great. I think that's going to be a really cool piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
It's going to be a fun one.
Because I think like to some people, right, that's the ultimate test of skill. Is like, if I have the same cards that you do, it has to come down to who's better at deck design or playing those cards out, right? There's not much else to correct for. And so I do think this is if this works, if this is exciting, if it's interesting, we might see more, I guess, hypothetically, we might see more duplicate sealed mechanics kind of pop up here and there. It's the first time we've experimented with it, so I'm also going to keep my eye on how those dragon matches go and what the feedback on those are when the tournament ends. Final mechanic that I wanted you to sort of run us through. So we talked about the tiered mechanic, right? This is a tiered tournament where it's sort of gate kept. The best players are kept out. That's the tiered mechanic. We bring them in for Dragon Boss battles, which is the duplicate sealed mechanic. The last mechanic, which I'm aware of and I wanted to discuss with you, was the choice to make this the so-called classic Gauntlet League experience. I'm just going to read from the second page of the rule set, where you write, "We are going back to our classic format for this league. You will start with a 6-pack starting pool featuring the last 6 standard sets." And standard has never been less relevant than now, but still, it's an interesting idea to go back to the classic mix. And here we have, Ether Drift, Foundations, Duskmourn, Bloomburrow, and this is controversial, a modified Outlaws of Thunder Junction pack, and Murders of Karloff Manor. For each of your losses, you may choose any one of these last 6 standard packs as your comeback pack. All right, why the return to ancient times, the classic Gauntlet League formula? I don't know who's been clamoring for this, if anyone. It is kind of neat, to do a flashback to the earlier league iterations. But what inspired this? What are the dangers? Talk me through it.
Yeah, well, so I guess it's probably easiest to start with the dangers. We know the dangers because the last few times that we've run a classic league, we've had some less than desirable outcomes in terms of we've had runaway super powerful packs in a few leagues, and some people are really sort of libertarian about this. They're really like, let people make mistakes, don't signpost, don't sort of hold people's hands, just throw in any pack, OTJ, with the worst packs that you've got, and let's see what happens. And maybe, who are we to tell people in advance that OTJ is super powerful? And I get that argument. For me, I'd rather go into this kind of with the knowledge that we have a pretty good experience of which packs are too powerful, the relative balance. We have this from a number of different things. And so finding ways to temper the pack selection a little bit, either by just limiting, or in this case, we're altering one of the packs a little bit because OTJ is just more powerful than the other things you can do in this. Those are tools that we have, and I think if we know that there's a high risk of just having unlimited of those things available, we should kind of step in and do something. So the risks are, we do something like this, one of the packs is too powerful, it's not fun, everyone has to pick that, the people who don't get crushed, and the league narrative turns into, did you pick the right pack early on? Right? That's for me the risk of doing a classic league. A classic league being where you can choose your punishment or your comeback pack from any of the last 6 standard.
Right.
So, to mitigate that risk, we decided that the real problem would be potentially Thunder Junction. I have heard people calling for just limiting the number of packs we can take of any given set. I'm actually open to that. I think we probably don't need to go that far here, though. But if this still does turn out to be Thunder Junction revisited, we may look at that in the future if we revisit the classic format.
Yeah, there's a couple.
And I guess you're asking what was.
Oh, sorry, go on.
Oh yeah, I was just going to say the inspiration in general for going back to this format at all, given those risks, was that I thought there was no set right now, no new set, so we had to choose something to do here. I thought this was a great time to revisit the classic formula because we'd have more players in who are new to the league or newer to the league.
Right.
And so this is a chance for a newer generation of people to experience, hey, this is the format, largely how we used to play it, 3 years ago.
And hopefully they've got the wild cards or the set collections built up from at least the past few expansions.
Yeah, well, that's all. That's our perennial issue, and it's hard to design around the possibility that people don't have enough wild cards. That's just really like something. When we try to have people loan accounts, We try to coach people on how not to waste wild cards and how to get wild cards. But like at the end of the day, that is one of the things that we just have to live with some of these ideas. There's not really, whatever we did here, the people would have to have the wild cards to do it, right?
Yeah.
Like if we revisited Ikoria, they'd still either have to have the set, they'd have to have the cards, or they'd have to have the wild cards. So
In my experience, grinding out wild cards, and that's all I've ever done is grind out wild cards. I've never bought packs for wild cards. There's always been enough.
Yeah.
As long as you're not, if you got two bad habits, if you're into limited and constructed, then I can see maybe it starts deploying your resources. But as a guy who only plays limited, I always have tons of wild cards to burn, and so I've never had that issue. But I guess I sympathize with people who are new to the game and who haven't had the chance to grind as long as I have for those cards to play basically for free on Arena.
I even have a account with enough. So if anybody ever needs it, I do lend out my backup account to people occasionally.
Nice.
If you're listening to this right now and you don't have the wild cards, you can join the league, or you can let me know anyway, and I can lend out my account.
Good fella.
Because I also play enough to have unlimited wild cards. More or less.
I probably should have done that too. I should have a duplicate account, but I've only ever had the one. I've only kept the one going.
That's fair enough.
So let's talk about your first point, which is like, how much do we trust players to make their own decisions and to not fall into traps, and how firmly do we want to fix the guardrails to stop players from making what are, from an experienced player's perspective, perhaps obviously bad choices. Right. So you're talking about the data sets that we have available for determining when it's appropriate to put the guardrails on. Thunder Junction itself had the sort of pack market where the best sets were basically economically identified. Right. That's a pretty strong and recent data point to work with. Mm-hmm. Looking back a little further, we had the March of the Machine set elimination mechanic, where the more a set was chosen, the more quickly it would disappear from the market. We had set wars, where we basically pitted cards from one set against cards of another set in teams of 4 and saw which sets were the most successful. Even the speed boost mechanic in Aetherdrift is kind of a micro economy, right? Where are people spending their speed boosts? Is it on March of the Machines, or is it some other lower powered set that they can use earlier, right? And then we have some special guests arriving on the scene. I hear. Oh, hey there!
Just come back. We're on vacation right now, and we are. They were out shopping for souvenirs, but they've just come back in.
Nice. Welcome to the show.
All right, guys. Okay, so I missed the last bit of your question there.
Well, no, it's not really a question. It's more like I'm just kind of backing up your point by saying, like, I mean, in terms of like the data that we have for determining which set is more powerful than which, we have a roughly reliable but not bulletproof guide for determining the strength of sets, and that's just through hard-won experience and data. I'm thinking about the last time that a set or a tournament was overrun with a non-main set pack, and it would be the most famous example that comes to mind again and again is the Wilds of Eldraine League, where everybody chose March of Machines, and it was it was a half and half. I'm not even sure that one was very clearly decided, because starting with 6 packs of Woe, you did have reason to shop in set. You had some reason to shop for parasitic mechanics and parasitic cards.
Yeah, but the people that did that all lost. Like everybody, there was I think one person who took that route to the top 8.
There's always
the other 7 went.
There's always one, right?
But I think it's also like, for me, the standard isn't like, are we 1,000% sure about this? It's just like, what's going to make the best tournament experience? So if one set is more powerful, we could still run with that. That's not a huge problem. It's just, I personally, I think we should not include options when we're designing leagues that are traps that we think people should never take under any circumstances, right? Because, what's the benefit? In my mind, there's no benefit to including a couple of options that might ruin a person's league, or
I don't
like
know.
really put them at.
I mean, the question about us including set packs that are possibly traps, it's the same reason that, for example, Mark Rosewater once defended putting bad cards in sets. It's a learning moment, right? When you try to play one with nothing and you lose, that's a learning moment that you can't have if you just preemptively eliminate those cards from sets. And some people think that Magic is a less rich game now that they've put the handrails on and they've made every card useful than how it used to be, where you'd have genuinely bad, sometimes obviously, sometimes sneakily bad cards, sort of planted throughout the set as learning moments or grown moments or just a change in the play experience.
I'm sympathetic to that argument. I would say, though, for our specific case, we have 3 or 6 week long tournaments. If you accidentally sabotage your pool, and put yourself at a disadvantage for every match you're going to play for the next month, I just think the downside of that is too high to be paid off by the learning experience. I mean, I get the appeal of letting people make those mistakes, and I think there's plenty of space left to make mistakes even when we have the guardrails on. But yeah, I just think having the mistakes be that bad is no good. I'll give you the example that really drove this home for me. It was my experience in our Set Wars league, which was a 3-week league where you chose one set and all your packs, including your starting pool, came from that one set. And I just found that, you were at a structural disadvantage if you picked the wrong set early. There was no coming back, and it was not a fun experience. It was a learning experience, but it wasn't enough for me to pick a set that was okay, but hopeless against a number of other sets. Was just like not not a thing I would hope to as a mechanic, and it's something I hope to avoid in our newer mechanics.
But to be fair, right, for Set Wars, that was a set of 4 players who drafted their sets and whose results were being recorded as a team. So obviously having the crappy pool in your team is a bad feel, but someone's got to do it, right? So I think that having that be a team mechanic took out a lot of the feels bad that kind of mechanic.
Yes, but each of the 4 players chose from a different set of 4 sets, right?
Yeah.
So it wasn't that one player got the worst in yours. It was that if you chose the wrong set of the 4 available to you, there was no coming back. And even if you chose the right one, but yours was weaker than the right one in a different pool of sets. I mean, my experience was just losing matches that I never had a chance in over and over again over the course. At least it was only a 3-week league.
Yeah. Stay tuned for the stay tuned for the Set Wars episode of Leagues Behind coming soon.
I will. I'll be tuning in.
All right.
I got a comment.
In the meantime, though, the more pressing question for Next Generation League is why not to give us actually what I think is a better data set and to better protect people from the consequences of their own bad choices. Why not just limit the number of packs from each set to 1? And people only add 5 packs during their 3-week league, and that way they can pick the 5 best and 1 gets left behind, and we get data on not only the order in which packs are chosen, but which packs are least chosen and therefore possibly should never have been in contention. I think that'd be an excellent data point and a great way to save people from themselves. Don't you think?
So I'm open to that. I don't know if we're looking to revisit the rule set now that it's been published, but it is a change. I think I've seen some convincing arguments for this in the league crafting. For me, the main reason not to do this, besides the fact that we've already published the rule set, is just the idea that this is really meant to be like a small version of our classic format. So that takes us big step further away from our classic format
Right.
to do super hard limiting of which comeback packs you can take.
Yeah. Yeah, and I
But
think I
like,
think I think too,
you know, see the argument.
that's a distinct mechanic that we could bring into another league, and I think in a 3 week league, the possible deforming effects of choosing quote unquote the wrong set are actually kind of circumscribed or limited by the fact that it's a 3 week tournament and that you only do get 5 packs anyway. So it doesn't really snowball
Yeah.
week after week after week. If you make the wrong choice, you're going to get a bloody nose. The tournament will be over, and you get to start again. So maybe you're right. Maybe we shouldn't mess with the rules. Maybe we should stick with the printed version. But I do think that the idea of having a set of punishment packs that people can avail themselves of that are, depletable at a rate of sort of one per use, and then that kind of seems like it might have some legs, and it might give us actually a lot of usable data for future leagues like this, where we have to sort of sort between different punishment packs, comeback packs, the new branding, different comeback packs in terms of their relative strength.
Yeah, I think that almost sounds like its own germ of a league concept, Like, I think that is something we could explore for sure. It's definitely different. I mean, that makes this league much more of a chaos league, which, I mean, this will be to an extent a chaos league because you start with a mixed starting pool, right? But you can then focus in on one set with all of your comeback packs if you want. So this will be a bit of a chaos league. If we were forcing everyone to end the league with 2 of each of these 6 packs, I think it would be much less coherent pools at the end. I mean, that's totally fine. I just think that's a different thing from the original vision. And I can see the argument for it. I think there's a couple good arguments for it, that it would make pack choices more interesting, because as it stands, you'll probably focus in on a single type of pack, although maybe not. So, well, it's not 100% that, but I can see the argument that that's where a lot of people will go with it.
So let's say that the rules stay as they are. I'm going to ask you a hard question now. I've asked you a lot of softball questions that are kind of just, underhand throws over the plate. This is a bit of a curveball here. I'm going to challenge you. What would you say to the objection then, with the running with the rules as printed, that this is going to be a chaos league in the starting pools, and then it's going to turn into Outlaws of Thunder Junction League version 2? What would you say to that? Is that a problem? Is that a feature, not a bug, or is that like something you're interested to find out, or is it a foregone conclusion?
I'm fine if that happens, and I'm open to the idea that that'll happen and it'll be bad. Like that could happen and be good, right? Like, that sounds interesting. But maybe that'll happen and people won't like it. And that, I think, is okay in this format, a 3-week league. Yeah, I think we're okay with it being, a failed experiment in that way.
Ouch.
But I don't think that that's a foregone conclusion. In some ways, the worse than that scenario would be that it becomes a set wars, not an OTJ league in the final iteration. And we just find out which set was strongest, right?
Right.
If everyone focuses on Thunder Junction and that's the correct choice, at least that's a fair playing field in the late stages of the league. If people are split between that and Duskmorn, and Duskmorn turns out to be way stronger, all the people who chose Junction, I think, that becomes a harder pill to swallow there. But even that scenario, I think, and we learn from it for the next design.
Yeah, so that's the thing that we'll maybe close on, right? So we say, like, in 3-week leagues, we're more willing to try wacky ideas. We're more willing to give a shot to ideas that we wouldn't be comfortable running for 6 weeks, but that should still have their day in the sun. I think maybe it's slightly misleading to say we're okay with it being a failure. I think we're gambling on it not being a failure. I think I think it's maybe more the case to say that we wouldn't run the tournament if we thought it was going to fail, right?
No, I'm not saying that's going to happen. I'm saying in the scenario, even in that worst case scenario, I don't think that's a disaster, right? I don't think that.
Yeah.
We knew for sure
the fail case is still good.
Action. I don't. Yeah, I think the fail case is still good here. I think it'll still be a fun league. Although we'll listen to the feedback. We'll see. This is going to be a league experiment. A couple really big things. We are experimenting a bunch of players. We're experimenting on including a bunch of players who are not part of the league. We are experimenting, right? And then we're also experimenting on this sort of version of our classic formula. So that's a lot of calculated risks that we're taking. And so we'll be listening for feedback a lot on which of those things are okay to do in the future and which things, right? So I think, like, I don't expect all of those things to be well reviewed, but I hope they are. But I don't think that we're going to 1,000, but I'm hoping we're batting at least 500 on these innovations.
Yeah, and I think that it's also important to know, like, just not in terms of the tournament as in itself, but rather a tournament in relation to the other tournaments on offer from the Arena Gauntlet League's regular calendar. This is the first time in history we've, except for Player of the Year, where we've overlapped two tournaments, which is interesting. And if this works, if we're able to pull this off without Steve being overtaxed or the player base rebelling or whatever else disastrous that could happen, then this opens the door for subsequent 3-week leagues, for which there are, I think, 2 spaces upcoming in the calendar year that we're aware of, possibly more. So again, if this overlap with Next Generation League works, we could possibly have 2 more quirky leagues out there by the end of 2025 on yet to be determined themes, and maybe as the Universes Beyond content comes thick and heavy, these 3-week tournaments where we concentrate more on the classic Magic the Gathering sets might be in higher demand, right? When you get sick of Spider-Man or whatever, here's your 3-week tournament where you get to look back at when Universes Beyond wasn't such a big force in your game.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe that's all flashbacks now.
Well, Adam, thanks for your time, and thanks for putting all the effort that you did into getting Next Generation League off the ground. It was a lot. It was a big ask in a lot of ways for a short tournament, but I'm glad that looking at it now as a sort of fait accompli, more or less. I'm glad that we found room for all these things, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it all plays out. Like you are. Registration ends a week from today, which is to say March the 19th. So if you're watching this when I release it, sign up now if you're eligible. If you haven't won more than 3 top 8s, sorry, if you haven't won more than 2 top 8s, and if you haven't won a league, sign up today for Next Generation. It's sure to be a blast, and as Adam already sort of laid out, a chance to compete against people who aren't necessarily masters of the format, people who are just up and coming in the Gauntlet League. Any final words for our audience?
No, you covered it. Looking forward to this one from the sidelines.
All right, Adam. Thanks again for everything, man. Looking forward to preying on some of our Next Generation players, joining you in the skies above as an ancient dragon, ready to wreak havoc on the young ones in their boss matches. Got to get that horde. Got to get paid. Got to get paid. Got to get that Skrilla.
Coming for it.
Okay. All right, man. Thanks for now. Bye for.